Hello and welcome back to Defense Diaries. I am your host, Bob Motta, and I am joined once again by my beautiful and brilliant co-host, Allie. What's up, girl?
Hey, babe. Hey, all.
So look, as you guys most of you know, at least if you're not new to the station or the channel, I am a criminal defense attorney. My beautiful and brilliant wife is a criminal defense attorney. And tonight we have or this afternoon, actually, we have a very, very special guest. And her name is Amanda Knox. Her name is known worldwide, but for those of you who may not know the full story, we want to give you some of her background.
Amanda was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. She grew up in a close-knit family, active in sports, curious and bright. By 2007, she was studying at University of Washington and decided to spend a year abroad in Perugia, Italy, a picturesque college town. Like any 21-year-old, she was looking forward to the adventure, the language, the independence, and new friendships.
But only a few months into her stay, tragedy struck. And on November 1st of 2007, Amanda's roommate and friend, Meredith Kercher, was brutally murdered in their apartment. Almost immediately, Amanda and her boyfriend at the time, Raffaele Solicito, became suspects after observed consoling one another in a warm embrace outside the scene, which was viewed as inappropriate behavior for a young woman who had just found out that her roommate was brutally murdered. Even though another man, Rudy Goudet, was later tied to the crime by DNA and convicted. Prosecutors built a sensationalized case around Amanda.
The prosecution's story wasn't about evidence because really there wasn't any connecting Amanda to the murder. Instead, they crafted a narrative, and we're all aware of how powerful a narrative can be. But this narrative was about her character. They painted her as a dangerous young woman, too carefree, too sexual, too different. She was accused of being a femme fatale who lured Meredith into some kind of twisted sexual game gone wrong. The tabloids had a field day. Headlines blared the phrases like Foxy Knoxy, a childhood soccer nickname, and turned it into a brand for the alleged temptress at the center of an international murder mystery.
And this image of Amanda, this beautiful American girl turned alleged sex-crazed killer, dominated the coverage, media coverage for years. It didn't matter that forensic evidence didn't back it up. It didn't matter that the story kept changing. What mattered was the spectacle. Amanda wasn't just on trial in an Italian courtroom. She was on trial in the court of public opinion, and the verdict there was shaped by headlines, not facts.
In 2009, Amanda and Raffaele were convicted. She spent nearly 4 years in an Italian prison before her conviction was overturned. After years of retrials and appeals, in 2015, Italy's highest court exonerated her completely. Rudy Goudet, whose DNA was found all over the crime scene, served time technically not for the murder, but for the break-in. I mean, for the murder, but they never put the weapon in his hand. They put that in Amanda's hand. But by then, Amanda's reputation had been dragged across every front page in the world, and the prosecution wasn't about to give up on their salacious story.
And I want you to think about this for just a minute, if you can. If you could try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, which we always ask you to do over here. Imagine being a 20-year-old college student, excited about the trip of a lifetime, the ability to be able to go over and study abroad in this country that you've always loved, being suddenly vilified as a symbol of lust and violence while fighting for your life in prison in a country that's not your own, where you barely speak the language at that point in time. And then, even after freedom, still living under the shadow of that narrative. That's what makes her new book so incredibly powerful. It's called Free: My Search for Meaning. And it's not just about exoneration. It's much more. It's about reclaiming her humanity, her story, and her identity beyond the headlines.
So I guess let's bring Amanda on. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We are so excited to have you on. It's I I've been trying to book you since I heard your book was coming out, even before I knew the Hulu was coming out, and then I had the opportunity to listen to it, which I highly recommend to anybody that hasn't purchased the book, either in printed format or if you're an Audible person like me, just because of time constraints. I highly recommend the Audible version because the reality is you've got Amanda is narrating it. And to me, it was an amazing way to listen to it. And for somebody who is very involved in wrongful conviction work, and we've had many interviews on our channel with people that have been wrongfully convicted and then subsequently exonerated, and they always are amazing interviews. And it's one of those things where I kind of go into it, despite the fact that I've interviewed so many wrongfully convicted and exonerated people. I'm always in my mind, I'm like, man, like I wonder if they're going to be bitter, and they
Hmm.
just never are. And the way, and they almost to a person, all of them do what you do now, which is you're advocating for similarly situated people that have been wrongfully convicted and fighting for exonerations and trying to right wrongs that have been that have occurred in our justice system. So it's an amazing book because to me it was such a deep dive into the psychology of everything that happened to you in such a profound way that it really moved me. I thought it was an incredible piece of writing, and I thought that you were allowed yourself to kind of bare your soul in a
Hmm.
way that you just don't really see that often. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I was very moved by just like the emotion in your reading. So I'm wondering, was the narrating part just as cathartic as the writing, or
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I love that you listened to it because you're right. There is something that's especially immersive about hearing it as I'm reading it because I very much am I'm not unmoved by what I went through. I'm still very haunted by everything that I've gone through and I'm still working through a lot of the emotions. And so you hear that in my voice as I'm reading it. And one special just like note about creating the audiobook version of it is my friend was the director. He was one of the first readers of the book who gave me notes when I first wrote the draft. And so he was very familiar with the story, and I felt very comfortable to be vulnerable in his presence. And so I think it's a very special thing in terms of how audiobooks are created. It's especially personal that way. As far as your note about speaking with other wrongly convicted people, and one of the goals that I had in writing this, my own story of the after it all is, when you hear wrongful conviction stories, typically what you hear is, you hear about the crime, you hear about the courtroom drama, you hear about them getting out of prison, and then it's the end.
Right.
And in a way, that's like the moment that our lives begin because we've been waiting to live for however long it has been that we've been trying to prove our innocence. And it's a tremendous challenge to just go back into normal life and have purpose and have a sense of place. And there are all these diverse obstacles that we face, the least of which being just getting back into the rhythm of life. Someone
Yeah.
asked the question, what's the name of the book again? It's called Free: My Search for Meaning. And yeah, so like there's the issue of trying to reintegrate into free life, which has a different pace and a different sense of purpose. There's a sense of trying to reintegrate yourself into humanity again. I think a lot of people, including myself, who have been wrongly convicted, feel like we are blamed for our own wrongful conviction. People tend to take the stance that there's something uniquely wrong with us, as opposed to uniquely wrong with what was done to us.
Yeah.
And so we face a lot of stigma coming out, even after we've been, vindicated and freed. And then, like, I mean, even just the issue of purposefulness, right? Like, there is something bittersweet about proving your innocence to the world. It is one of the most horrifically existential crises that anyone will ever face. But also, once you finally achieve it, it's like, what else could I possibly do in my life that could be as meaningful And that's, I think, a big reason why so many of us go into advocacy work is, one, we feel a kind of survivor's guilt. We know that we're not the only wrongly convicted people who have ever gone through this experience, and that of all the people who are still in prison, we are one of the lucky ones that got out. And also, once you live through this experience, you have an insight into the criminal justice system that just doesn't go away. I mean, I don't know if most of your listeners are criminal defense attorneys or not, so they clearly have insights into how the sausage gets made. But like for someone like me, I was a creative writing student. I was a
Yeah.
20-year-old creative writing student who was super into Harry Potter and rock climbing. Like, I knew absolutely nothing about the criminal justice system, and I belonged to a world of people who didn't know anything about the criminal justice system, who never had to think about it. And
Right.
so it led me, and I think many people, to be uniquely vulnerable, but also uniquely positioned to perpetrate the kinds of harms against wrongly convicted people just out of a state of ignorance. So all of that, like, reflection goes into my book that is intended to describe this more universal experience of trying to overcome trauma, integrate it into your life in a meaningful way, but not in a way that makes you limited or feel like a victim the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And how do you reclaim a sense of agency, and how I did that personally.
Yeah. The way that you've described it in terms of, and it's one of the things that we do have a fair amount of criminal defense attorney fans, but we also have a lot of people that we've been really kind of, our mission on this channel has been trying to describe to people and explain to people what it is that criminal defense attorneys actually do in
Mm,
this country. And then, the thing that always captivated me about your case wasn't the bullshit sensationalism and the way that they had the media really as their right hand man, so to speak, in terms of kind of cementing this conviction that they were able to get against you in a case that had no evidence against you. There was no physical evidence against you. But what always fascinated me and horrified me was this 20-year-old woman who had gone over to a foreign country and then getting thrust into their criminal justice system and having no one, and I mean no one there to support you in terms of like your family and your people, where it's bad enough in the US going through it, but at least you're within spitting distance of your support system, and you had none of it. And like when I watched the first doc, whenever that came out on Netflix, 2015, 2016, and I was just so, and I had seen other stuff about it, but that was the first time I really was able to hear you speak on it. And just the feeling that the empathy that I had for you in terms of how terrifying that had to have been. And it's like, and I know Allie's going to want to ask you questions about just the concept of being interrogated in a language that you don't speak fluently
yeah.
is so horrifying to me. Like the entire experience had to have been so surreal. And and I think that that was evidenced early on when you're kind of sucked into their process, and you're under the mistaken assumption that you're being
Well,
treated as a witness.
misbelieve she was led to misbelieve that, but
Right. So it's like it's an insane story, and it's one why it's the reason that I love your book, because you're really trying to get to the heart of everything that comes along with that. Like
Mm.
every single feeling that you had throughout that process and still are dealing with now is so incredibly moving. I just it was such, and I've read a lot of wrongful conviction books. I've never read anything like this because it's different, and it really sheds a light in a much different way, because your case was so high profile, so you had that part of it that you had to try to deal with, and it was high profile in a way that you had to try to overcome. You know what I mean? Because it was such an attack, a personal attack on you and your humanity and who you were as a person, that you had to try to somehow rebuild yourself And I'll tell you, like when I was promoting this live on Twitter, and I have a relatively decent sized account, and like I get a couple people in there still now, despite the fact that you've been exonerated, like, oh, I wouldn't spend a dime on her book, or oh no, she's 100% guilty. And it's like it's that thing, and you've talked about it, especially in the beginning of the Netflix doc, where you're like, this is a theory. This was nothing more than a story. And we talk about it all the time that any criminal case, you're dealing with a narrative that has been created and drawn up in a lab by a prosecutor that's looking at evidence, and whatever their lens is, whatever their filter is in terms of their life experiences, that's going to lead them down that path to which they're going to ultimately land on what they believe happened. And it's nothing more than that. It's just, it's a story. It's a narrative.
But here it was way more made up than even in the US.
It
Like
was-
the whole story just made up out of whole cloth, because they see you in a loving embrace with your boyfriend at a time that they think you should be hysterical crying. So I did just want to ask you, as far as um the language barrier. No, you know what? Before we get there, the during the investigation, so many false confessions involve the disenfranchised, and people that don't really get the platform to explain the story. And I thought what you and I know this is going backwards from where you start with Free, but that you and Raffaele were both able to explain like the mental process in such a way. You guys are both so articulate and well educated that goes into sort of a false statement, or which can translate into a false confession in a different scenario, but that the way they're telling you things, your mind is struggling to piece it together in a way that's consistent with what they're insisting the evidence shows to them. And I was just, you did a really, really good job of explaining the mental struggle that you go through when the police are not only physically abusive, but lack of time, and, telling you things had to happen a certain way, that your mind starts to try to piece it together. Can you tell us a little bit about how
Yeah.
that was?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point about being articulate about it, both Raffaele and I have had to learn how to articulate it, because it, there has been so much of an insistence on what we felt is the part of the general public to not believe us, right? Like again, like I've been blamed for the outcome of my own interrogation. I remain a convicted person in Italy for a lesser crime. And the crime that they say that I committed is that I lied to the police in order to thwart the investigation and pin the crime on an innocent person. And that's not true. That's not what happened. But that is the perception, both in Italy and into a bigger extent even abroad, is people just do not want it to be true that two very young innocent people were brought into an interrogation room and they were coerced into making false statements. And that's a very, very scary reality for people to accept. And I think it's a much easier thing for people to accept that two innocent people who had no history of violence and no motive to commit this crime nevertheless were somehow involved and were lying about it, and therefore are, compromised or corrupt in some kind of capacity, or guilty or guilt adjacent in some kind of capacity. And it's interesting because for me, one of the things that I'm still trying to figure out after all these years is why there is resistance to believing people who falsely confessed. And it's not always universal, right? Like as the years have progressed, I think people have come to learn more about what happens in interrogation rooms, and that's been a huge factor. Just transparency as to what happens. Like, if you were to ask a regular person on the street if they know that police can and will lie to you, it just it it breaks people's brains. Like,
Yeah.
I as a young person, again, who had no knowledge about the criminal justice system, did not know that police can and will absolutely lie to you if they think that it's going to manipulate you into giving them information that they think that you have, that you are withholding from them. So that was something that I absolutely did not understand. I also did not understand, and I think this is uh, part naivete. Like, I was only 20 years old when this happened, so I was very much a young person in my mind. I did not have a lot of life experiences that would have prepared for me for this moment. I had military in my family, and so I was raised to be obedient and respectful to authority figures, especially those in uniform. My mom was a teacher, so I was also very I felt very connected to authority figures. I felt that I could very much trust them. And so when I come home and discover that my house is a crime scene, and I ask my boyfriend to call the police for me because I don't even know how to call the police in Italy,
Yeah.
I assume that my innocence is it never even occurred to me that the police would suspect me.
Right.
And of course, it never occurred to me that they would lie to me. And that set me up for a series of misunderstandings that ultimately led to that very, very horrific interrogation environment, which is not what you see when you watch, a true, shows like
Right.
CSI, like that's not how interrogations are. And I think one of the things that's really important for people to understand is that there's a big legal difference. And I did not know this until I went through what I went through. And this is true both in Italy and here in the United States, that there's something called an interview, and then there's something called an interrogation. And they are very different things legally, but as they play out in reality, they morph into each other very quickly. And again, that's something that people do not understand, is that when someone like a police officer is interviewing you, technically you don't have any right to anything, right? You are just answering their questions. You're not in custody. You are not being accused necessarily of anything. And so you don't have the right to an attorney. You don't have the right to, an interpreter necessarily. You're just there answering questions. That's technically an interview. And an interrogation is when you are in custody and you are being accused of something, and therefore you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. But where does one begin and where does one end?
Right.
And
The
how
police
does
intentionally blur that line. That is
exactly.
always
This is the thing that, as a criminal justice reform advocate, I'm a huge proponent of, because the police who interrogated me all claim that they never interrogated me, that they were just interviewing me, that they never explicitly accused me of anything, except lying to them, and and therefore I was never entitled to an attorney. I was never entitled to an interview, like all of those protections that we put in place when you are interrogating someone and they might say something that could implicate themselves in a crime. That was never respected in my case, and that isn't respected in a lot of people's cases.
Right.
And so what was horrifying for me is I went through every step of an interrogation. I was accused of lying to the police. I was told lies. I was told that I was physically present when the crime occurred. I was told that I had trauma and induced amnesia and that I had blacked out having witnessed the crime. And that if I didn't, and I was threatened with prison time. I was told if I do not tell the police who committed this crime, and they accused me of covering up for this person's crime, that I would spend 30 years in prison and never see my family again. And yet, technically, I was not being interrogated. Like, that's the thing that just blows my mind. Now, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in my favor. I appealed to them and said I was clearly being interrogated. They say I wasn't in custody, but I wasn't allowed to leave the room. Like, these are all things that you see when police are blurring the lines between interview and interrogation, but you don't know that as a regular person who's just trying to collaborate with the police officers in the aftermath of an incredibly traumatic experience. And I was doing that on the heels of coming home and finding one of my friends had just been murdered. And so I'm already just in a state of like shock and disbelief and emotional turmoil. And then on top of that, I'm doing this in Italian, which I speak like a child. Like, I do not have the language to communicate. And
Right.
I'm wondering if the police are getting angry at me because I'm just not speaking, correctly. And there's a question on the screen. They do technically have something like Miranda rights in Italy, and they never read them to me because
Because you were
again,
being interviewed.
I was being interviewed as a witness. I was not being accused as a suspect. And again, so all of these things get very blurry. And I think in my case and in so many people's cases, police officers rely on people's ignorance in order to take advantage of those blurry legal lines.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to clarify for those of you who may not know the full story, and if you want more about the investigation, the arrest, what's the name of your first book?
It's called Waiting to be Heard. And
So
that is my memoir, talking about the trial and what it was like to go through that. And
so
actually, if you're interested, there's a new Hulu show that I executive produced called The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox that also covers the trials and specifically takes you inside the interrogation room so that you can see what it was really like. Uh,
right.
and yeah, get a glimpse
Yeah,
of
we
the very
we
visceral
Bob and I watched that watched that as well. So you spoke about how you appealed or you challenged the statements and from your interview. Did they exclude for and Bob's gonna get into how there were dual trials in a second, but did they technically exclude the statements that you made for the purposes of the criminal trial?
So, this is where there's a quirky feature of the Italian
It
legal system.
blows my mind.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Italian criminal trials are tried at the same time as civil trials, which means that the attorneys who are representing the plaintiffs are in the courtroom as you are being tried for the crime and are acting as further like extra prosecutors in the case. So I didn't just have a prosecutorial team that was staffed by the state. It was also a prosecutorial team that was, the Kercher family's attorney was a prosecutor, and the person who owned the house where the crime occurred, she had an attorney, and there was also an attorney for my boss, Patrick Lumumba. So in the statements that I was coerced into signing, I implicated my boss at the time, Patrick
Right,
Lumumba,
that's what I
of
meant
the
to
crime.
chime in and say that
Yes.
you never falsely confessed about yourself. You falsely implicated your boss. So go on. Sorry.
Yes, and the reason I did that was because the police led me to believe that he had committed the crime, and they led me to believe that based upon a text message that I had sent him the night of the murder that they misinterpreted, again, because of language barrier. And so they, over the course of the interrogation, became convinced that he was the killer and that I was covering for him because he was my boss. And that led to its whole ordeal. So in court,
But
it was recognized that my rights had been violated in my interrogation, and so my statements could not be used against me with the charge of, murder, right? Like, they could not be the jury could not consider them for the charge of murder. However, I was also being charged with criminal slander against my boss. And so the jury was supposed to consider the statements that I signed in court only for that charge and could only use it as evidence for that charge. However, it was the same jury that was going to be determining both of, both of these accusations, both of these charges. And so how they were supposed to hear evidence in one ear and then disregard it for a different crime, like
I
that.
loved what you guys did in the series, in the scripted series, with the ear coming off the jury. Like, okay, let me listen now, and okay, and then I was like
Yeah.
that. I mean, it was
Really well done. It
really
was
well
really
done.
well
Thank you.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you guys don't know what so the way that they operated with respect to the whole Patrick scenario is that Patrick had sent a text, and he was Amanda's boss. She worked at his burgeoning little bar. He was trying to start this business, and he was, he had hired Amanda hoping that she would draw some tourists in and other people in, and she had gotten off. So that night, her and Raffaele were chilling basically, and she gets a text saying, "Hey, you don't have to work tonight." She's like, "Yes, that's amazing." And then she just sends a response that every American has probably sent 10 million times. Is like, "Oh, cool. I'll see you later. Have a good night." But that's that part of it, that have a good night part.
No, the see you later part.
Yeah. So yeah, it was.
I understand that, but their theory was that she had made an arrangement to meet him later based on the see you later, and they're just ignoring
the have
a good night part. So when Amanda's talking about how it was lost in translation, this was literally lost in translation. It was like, imagine again being a 20-year-old over studying abroad in a country where you've got some baseline knowledge of the language, but you're certainly not in any way, shape, or form fluent, trying to explain to a room full of Italian cops that this doesn't mean what you think that it means. This is a common way to say goodbye to somebody, or have a good night, or take care, whatever the case. That wasn't a plan to meet, but that one text became the underpinning of their entire case against Amanda. And it was at that point, because you tried adamantly after your head cleared, you're like, "Oh my God, like I have to go write another statement, because that thing that just happened to me, that is not what happened. I need to clarify this." And you were, of course, shut down. Like, the whole thing is so terrifying. That's why your story, and the fact that you have the bravery to come out and talk about it like you do, in the face of aggression, in the face of people calling you like all the bullshit that comes along with being convicted, because and then exonerated, you'll always have those people that exist in the world that will always believe that you were a culprit, no matter what the courts have said. You know what I mean? And that's your reality. And it's so frustrating from like the criminal defense attorney side of it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, what do you have to do in order to really clear your name in the minds of everybody that exists? And I don't know that there is anything that you can do, because once people are sold a good of bills, and if they're not willing to put in the work to look into it more deeply and really try to analyze what you were convicted on, then there is no telling them anything new. They're going to be stuck in whatever mindset they're in. And man, it's just like what you've had to deal with over the last, it's unbelievable. It's such an amazing story. So that's why we're really, really thrilled to have you here.
Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, that's been the great question of my life, and I've been confronted with the fragility and the suggestibility of the human mind in a very, very profound way from a very young age. And I think back to, this language barrier. It's interesting because yes, I wrote "Ci vediamo più tardi, buona serata." Uh, you know, see you later, have a good night, right? And they interpreted that the way that they chose to interpret it, which is, I made an appointment to meet my boss the night of the murder, and they say this contradicts your alibi, and you've been lying to us, and he's the murderer, and why are you covering for him? All of that. And yes, the language barrier did play a role in that. But I also think that confirmation bias played just as much a role, because even before they read that text message, they already believed that I was involved in the crime and
Yep.
that I was not telling the truth about something.
Right.
And the reason we know this is, now to this day, police have been interviewed. My prosecutor's written a book about the case. And one thing that he talks about is how, from the minute that he showed up at the crime scene, he believed that the way that this murderer actually got into our house, which was by breaking in a window and climbing in through the window, he said that that wasn't real, that it was staged.
Right.
That no burglar ever would have chosen that window of all windows to break and climb into, and therefore someone who lived in the house was involved in the crime and was covering up by faking a break-in. And there were only 3 of us who lived with Meredith, and I was the only American. And, I think that he looked at the way I was acting versus the way my Italian roommates were acting. They were hysterical and, crying, but people don't remember that also everyone was yelling in Italian. And at the time that even Raffaele was cuddling me outside of the house, I wasn't even sure what was going on. So there's a lot of lost in translation moments. But I'm even thinking to the number of times that even when you speak the same language, people will find reasons not to interpret you the way that you intended. And one of the most egregious examples of this is this case where a guy was telling his interrogators, "I need a lawyer, dog." He said, "I need a lawyer, dog." And they chose not to respect his right to an attorney because they said he was literally saying he wanted a lawyer dog.
God.
And it's no, you are clearly choosing to misinterpret what he's saying
Right.
Right.
in order to deny him his right to an attorney.
Right.
And that's again, that's confirmation bias. That is going out of your way to not respect the intention behind what is being said. And that should never be happening in these kinds of high stakes scenarios.
No, for sure.
And
Well,
it's essentially especially in terms of text messages. I mean, what you're talking about happens in conversation. We can obviously misconstrue what another person is saying. Probably the likelihood that it's going to occur via text message is exponentially higher because you cannot understand tone, tenor, context in a text message. It's kind of like the whole, my cousin Vinny thing where he's like, "Oh, you shot the clerk," and he's saying, "I shot the clerk." You can clearly hear the question at the end of it, in terms of tone and tenor. So yeah, you're right though. It is that confirmation bias, and you're right. In your case, based on the kiss with you guys trying to console each other when this insane thing happens and is just thrust into your life out of the blue. It's like, we'll talk about it on this channel all the time. It's like trying to figure out how somebody is supposed to act when they're thrust into a trauma situation is insane to me. We all are different human beings. We all process things through our own memories, our own experiences, our own traumas that we may have experienced prior to. That is the lens in which we are going to see things, and we're going to respond accordingly. There is no right and wrong answer. But that thing, in terms of that photograph, that infamous photograph of you and Raffaele kissing gently, which really, if you look at it and you understand consoling, that's clearly, it's your 2 young kids, in this bizarre situation, and you're just kind of, and you're in 8 days into a relationship.
right. I mean, but you can see it on your face.
Yeah.
I when I look at it, I don't see anything sensual or sexual. I
Mhm.
literally see, like Bob saying, consoling, and your face is just it's raw. Maybe it's not hysterical like they wanted to see, but like you
Yeah.
said, you're
It's very
still
deer in
processing.
headlights. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
look back on that footage and I remember what I was feeling in that moment. I was completely overwhelmed and I was
Yeah.
trying to understand what was going on. And it to this day, the fact that so many people looked at that footage, we're all looking at the same thing, we
Right.
actually have footage. It's not just word of mouth,
Right.
right? We have the footage and people can look at the same footage and see very different things.
Yeah.
And that's something that is deeply just not like interesting is the wrong word, because I feel like this is really at the root of a lot of our conflict just
Yeah.
as people, is that we're seeing the same set of facts, but we are interpreting them in radically different ways
Yeah.
based upon our context and based upon our lens and based upon our motivations. And one of the reasons I saw that one of the questions that was down below, I'm keeping track of everybody's questions here that are popping up. One of the questions that was below was, why did I reach out to my prosecutor? And this is something that I write about in my book.
Yes.
And that
We were gonna
also
get to it, that's why I kind of put it to the side, but go ahead,
right.
speak to it
Yeah.
now.
Well, and we depict it in the show is the framing narrative of the show is me choosing to go back to Italy to confront my prosecutor. And one of the reasons is because I was haunted by not understanding why people, and specifically the person who signed my arrest warrant and fought to, put me in prison for life, why he believed he was doing the right thing, why he looked at me, a 20-year-old kid with no precedence and no motive and had an alibi, like why he looked at me and saw a rapist and a murderer.
Right.
And why, in the face of overwhelming evidence that this crime was committed by someone else, that he fabricated, like actually fabricated a
Right.
scenario in order to like make it possible for me to be guilty, even though all of the evidence pointed to someone else. It's still to this day, like I feel like people don't appreciate how much was like utterly fabricated, that and it was necessary for it to be utterly fabricated for the prosecution's case to make sense, including this idea that I was in a secret love triangle with my boyfriend Raffaele and this local burglar. That was a key element of the prosecution's theory, is that I was in a secret love triangle, despite the fact that no people ever saw me and this burglar ever together. There was no text messages between us. There was zero communication, no phone calls, no witnesses, nothing to make anyone believe that I had any relationship with this person whatsoever. And yet the entire prosecution's case rested on the idea that I was in a sexual love triangle, and that that my two, competing boyfriends were willing to rape my roommate for me to compete with each other for my affection, and then hold her down so I could stab her to death. Like that was the prosecution's theory. And like I could not understand why someone could believe that. Why
Could
someone
invent it
could invent it and then convince themselves of
himself.
it. And I did not believe that my prosecutor was an evil guy who didn't care about the truth. I thought that there was something more going on there. I thought that he was the hero of his own story, and I
Yeah.
wanted to understand how he could be led down this path, down this what he calls a logical path, to derive these conclusions from what ultimately were false premises. And it's that, like, some people think that I was, or when people ask me about this choice of mine to go and talk to my prosecutor, they're like, oh, were you trying to forgive him, all of that? And I say, no, I was not attempting to
Trying to understand.
forgive
And
him was
understand
not
it.
what I was trying to understand it.
Yeah.
I was like tortured with like the hurt that had happened to me, but also from a deep sense of curiosity. Like,
Right.
why? And the only way that I could think I could ever get any answers was if I confronted him about it.
100%. That is the only way. But, and that concept, and it's a powerful part when you guys buy the book. It's towards the end. It's one of the last few chapters in terms of all actually sections when you make the decision to go back over there and your family's trying to talk you out of it. Everyone's basically trying to talk you out of it because of this concept, like, oh, well, they're going to come up with something and they're going to arrest you again. You're going to be just berated and it's going to be a nightmare, like all the reasons not to. and then just your willpower to say, you know what, like this means this much to me in terms of me trying to rebuild myself so that I'm whole to whatever extent I can do that. I have to confront this guy, because when I look at it, and again, I'm a man, so it's like I don't have to deal with what y'all deal with in terms of misogynistic people and people doing things that are misogynistic in nature. When I look at it as a man and I'm seeing his thought processes, and I thought that the Hulu special or series, I keep calling it special, has done a nice job kind of giving you some background on who he is. And we're talking about McNeely, who was the prosecutor in Amanda's case. It really, and it starts to kind of flesh it out, in terms of his upbringing. And he's a very religious person. And, he's got thoughts, deep thoughts, probably about women and their role in society. And when, you have old heads, as I like to call them, that are, from a very different era that predates women having some rights, not only in this country, but like kind of globally, when you look at how women have always been treated as second-class citizens and subservient to men, you start to gain an understanding of like how this guy like was viewing you as this, liberated 20-year-old American who's coming over here, and it's like, it's terrifying. It's terrifying in the sense that, and I don't know what their process is in Italy in terms of, is there a preliminary hearing? Do they have to go to the equivalent of a grand jury in order to say, hey, this is what my case is, and we're going to put it in front of some citizens to see whether or not they're going to come back with a true bill of indictment? I don't know what their process is.
I mean, I can tell you.
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so in Italy, there are preliminary hearings before a judge. In my preliminary hearing, though, basically the prosecution laid out their case and said, this is what we think happened, but we need to investigate, because they arrested me within 5 days. So there was no there wasn't any evidence necessarily. They're just like, Amanda confessed here, we think that she's a flight risk. So this is why she should stay in prison while we pursue our investigation. And the judge was just like, all right, sounds good. And there we were. And then the investigation took 8 months. And so during that time, I was in isolation in prison, waiting for them to, work on the case and figure out who actually committed the crime. And what's nutty is that they did figure out who committed the crime. There was DNA of him all over the crime scene. But instead of admitting that they had arrested the wrong people, they just warped the evidence to fit this theory that I was involved somehow. And then I went before what it's not a grand jury per se. It's yet another judge who then examines the evidence and says, I think there is sufficient evidence here to warrant a trial. And that's what happened. And so the prosecution, once again, brought this idea to the court, and the court decided that it was sufficient to stand trial.
And I had one other question before you go, babe. In terms of how they set it up with you, so you have the judge, and I'm talking about during your trial, and then you have the people that they referred to as jurors. Are those citizens or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So those are citizens. So they're called lay judges in Italy. But yes, the idea is that there's one head judge, and he has a sidekick judge who's there to, help him. One of the big things that Italy does that we don't do here in the US is they have motivated verdicts. So every verdict that is passed has to have a written document that explains why they arrived at that verdict. And it's actually a very important part of their appeals process, because how can you appeal a verdict if you don't know why the people came to the conclusions that they did? And this is a very important thing that I think we could transport here in the United States, and that would make this whole process of like trying to appeal a verdict like less daunting, because it's almost treated like this sacred object that, no, you shall not question the verdict. Like, no, you can question the verdict if a judge or if a jury sort of in their written statement says, we relied on this, testimony, and that testimony turns out to have been unreliable or whatever. So that's a good thing. And the lay judge is there to help them with the written part of the verdict that will eventually arrive. But then there are these lay judges, which are just everyday people. just regular citizens from the local area who, however, are not sequestered. So they are 100% influenced and have access to all of the media, all of the social commentary around the case, everything, all of the scandal. They are consuming all of that on top of what they are consuming in the courtroom.
And in your case, it was ridiculous. It was just,
I
I
like,
mean,
yeah,
it
the level of trial by media in your case
no,
was,
but the vilifying you as a beautiful woman, as a sexual woman, I mean, touting 7 lovers as the whore of Babylon, it, it
Yeah, that idea that like, yeah, so when I was in prison, I was told that I was HIV positive.
oh my God.
They lied to me about that, and so I went back to my cell and I wrote down, based upon instruction by the warden at the time, who every person I had ever had sex with in my entire life, and if we use protection, like he said, you need to reach out and tell them they might be infected. And so I wrote down every single person I'd ever had sex with in my entire life at that point. And the very next day, my journal was confiscated and delivered to the prosecution and delivered to the press. And the way that it was put out there is that I had 7 lovers at one time, like in Italy, when in fact that was like in my entire life.
right.
And so this idea that I'm an American whore, and you brought up, this misogyny. There was also an interesting like nationalistic misogyny that played a role in the case. It wasn't just me that was misrepresented as a young woman. So I was characterized as a girl gone wild. Like when you think of an American girl, she's loose, she's easy, she's hypersexual. That's what the depiction of an American girl was like. Whereas my roommate, who had been murdered, she was a British girl. And the way that she was depicted and misrepresented in the courtroom was that she was a prude and that she was uptight and that she was judgmental, and that just the very fact that she was British and I was American meant that we were in conflict with each other just by our very natures. And so we both were stereotyped under this misogynistic lens, with me as the whore and her as the Madonna.
Wow.
And the idea being that we necessarily were coming into like sexual conflict with each other, when in fact that is once again an utter fabrication. Like,
Right.
Meredith had a casual boyfriend who she was hooking up with in Italy, like just like she
Same
was
as you.
having fun, same as me. We were very similar in this regard, but the idea that I was American and she was British and therefore we must hate each other was a tremendous stereotype that spoke to people and seemed to answer a lot of hard questions within an easy way, even though it was utterly false.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they built their motive. Like that was like whatever concept of a motive that is literally what they predicated upon.
Well, it was
This ridiculous concept that the two of you were that, you were in some way, shape, or form jealous of her because of her just her being in the
her
fact that she
purity.
was pure and you weren't, and like the whole thing was so bizarre and frankly terrifying, because it's like I don't think people understand when you're thrust in that situation, you have no ability to be able to try to convince, not let alone not convince anybody, but to be able to speak at length about anything that's actually true up until you get to trial, which if you think about that, it's just horrifying. I mean, it explains exactly what happened to you, at least in some sense, in that you were silenced from being able to really try to, in any way, shape, or form, clarify anything that they were saying in terms of whatever their biased opinion was on what happened in this case. And it's like, I just when I sit around and think about being thrust in a situation like that, it's so scary. It's
Oh,
just
it
it's
was very, very, very scary, and not just for me, for my family,
yes.
who knew from the beginning that this was just a huge misunderstanding. And one of the first things my mom said was, this story is bigger than you. Like the entire world is watching this story, and this narrative is being spun, and it's bigger than any of us. So how do you confront something like that? How do you confront the ghosts in other people's minds? Like
Right.
that's what it felt like I had to fight. It wasn't just, fighting for the facts in a courtroom. It was fighting some phantom menace that was in other people's minds that was being projected onto me. And that's a warfare that is you can't really fight in a courtroom, and I didn't have anywhere else, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
So, you wrote the first book, which we talked about, waiting to be heard, but free is about something deeper, as you have started to discuss. What compelled you to write this book now?
Mm. Well, first of all, I went back to confront my prosecutor, and coming out of that experience, I felt more free than I had ever felt. And I was not expecting to feel that way. And I realized that I had gone on a journey to reclaim my freedom, and it was an unexpected journey, and it was one that had many, many twists and turns, and could have gone the wrong way so many times. And I felt like I had a story to tell. Like it wasn't just a story of a bad thing that happened to me, which is also, an interesting and valid story. And anyone who's interested in that can read my first book.
Yeah.
But I think what I was discovered is that I was living and breathing a more universal story, which is when you've gone through trauma, or when life happens to you, which inevitably does. How do you make sense of it, and how do you reclaim a sense of agency in your own life? And what can that look like if you go about it um in a way that goes against all advice, you know? Like I went against all advice to go and confront my prosecutor and have a a decent conversation with him about what had happened, a respectful conversation, but one in which I really stood my ground, and one in which I gave him the every benefit of the doubt, and how it is possible to both stand up for yourself and express kindness and understanding at the same time. That was a huge growing moment for me after years of feeling like I was trapped. I was trapped in my own life that I didn't make, and that had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Like it was a hugely traumatic thing to, come back and out of prison and not get to go back to the life that I had before, and to
Right.
be forever bearing this like scarlet letter, and
Right.
to be associated with a crime that I had nothing to do with, and to live with the consequences of that, and to live with the pain of that, and trying to make sense of it, and trying to feel a sense of connection with other people again, but not being able to trust other people, not being able to trust myself, like all of that, of coming into myself again, and the mistakes that I made along the way, which is a hugely important part of the story to tell. Like when people go through trauma, their entire world is pulled out from underneath them, and they start, lashing out to try to like find what they can hold on to, and they make mistakes along the way, and I'm no different. And
Yeah.
so it was really trying to humanize and normalize that experience, while also offering a counterintuitive way back into a sense of knowing myself, trusting myself, and feeling connected with people again.
Do you think that women today are, like, still stuck in that box of Madonna versus whore? And if so, what are you, because I know you speak out, a lot of what you do is to tell women, like, you can't you slut shaming is against, sort of slut shaming, and to feel comfortable in your own skin, and to that being a sexual being a beautiful person, is not something that should be weaponized the way it was with you. Do you feel in the past almost 20 years, do you think women are still sort of in that box, that there's some duality there still?
I mean, I absolutely think that if you are looking to villainize or diminish or devalue a woman, it's still very easy, and kind of the go-to way to do it is by attacking her sexuality. I don't think that that goes away. I do think that in the past, 10 years, people have become more sophisticated around the stories of young women. So you aren't going to see as much the treatment that people like Monica Lewinsky or Britney Spears or, experienced back in the 90s or 2000s. I think there is more of a pushback against like easy targeting women like that. But at the same time, like to this day, I think that targeting women and devaluing them on the basis of sexuality, just like overvaluing them on the basis of sexuality,
Right.
is just that male lens that gets cast upon us and that we just have to live with. Like it's just a sort of baked into society that women to this day have to contend with. It's just one of those things.
And thinking about your prosecutor and like going back and talking to him, do you think that his sense of religion and his faith in his intuition, which is also God helping him, like contributed to him just sort of blindly believing he was right? Because if this is what I think, either God's telling it to me or my intuition's telling it to me. Did you get some sense of that in your prosecutor?
I mean, I think as far as like religion and his spirituality plays a role, I think that because he is a man of faith, he thinks of himself as someone who is self-reflective and who cares about being a good person in the world. Like he is God-fearing. He doesn't want to, come up, die and be confronted with a number of sins. He wants to be someone who has left an imprint on the world that is based on, his perception of himself as a God-fearing good person who is interested above all in justice and ensuring justice. I think that he also thinks of himself as a very logical person. And so if he is good and he is logical, he cannot be
Wrong.
corrupt or he
Right.
cannot be wrong. Like, he doesn't say like, even to me, he has said like, I'm capable of being wrong about things, but I would never knowingly and willingly, harm an innocent person. Like that's just against his understanding of himself as a person. And I believe him in that regard. Like I believe that he
Believed the story.
he convinced himself
Yeah.
of what he presented in court. I do not think that he is as logical as he believes himself to
Right.
be,
That's
though.
for sure.
I mean,
Well, logical through
it
his lens.
depends on what you mean logical by logical. If you mean deriving conclusions based upon premises, sure. But whether or not he has a good grasp on what is a true versus a false premises, like
Right.
that's where we differ.
Questionable. It's
And
Yeah.
and
I
that's
mean,
where I'm wondering if you felt like his, um,
I
because
think
I
his self-assurance, I think he views himself to be, he believes in what he believes. And so sometimes he struggles to distinguish between a fact and an opinion.
yeah. And now that you are in this period of your life as an advocate and you're doing a lot of wrongful conviction exoneration work, you see what Alison and I have seen for decades in our practice, and that's that concept that prosecutors have a very hard time walking back a mistake that they may have made in a case. It's so frustrating for me. Like we're all human. I will give a lot of grace to a prosecutor that says, you know what, I got it wrong. I'm so sorry. For whatever reason at the time when I was developing my theory of the case, this is the way that I saw it. And I was wrong. I will give them all the grace in the world to say, you know what? Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for admitting that you were wrong. I mean, we're going to have to deal with the ramifications of what your actions were back then. But however, at least you're willing to admit that you were wrong and you made a mistake. And it's just, you just don't see it. And it's,
No, you
when you're
don't.
dealing with like a guy like McNeely and, you know, and he's got an ego, there's no question about it. I mean, and I think, I think based on the little I know about him, and most of it is from your book, because that's what I take as the strongest source. I think that he felt that his motive was pure, but the inability to not recognize the cognitive dissonance between the fact that he had a guy who was a known burglar, whose DNA is all over Meredith and who was all over her bedroom, and not
Well,
putting
like
the
you
two
said, no
together.
connection to Amanda, with no
No, like,
connection.
I mean, like him not being capable of putting those two things together and saying, wow,
Mm.
this
Yeah,
seems off.
I've had, and this is something that's super interesting because I've had conversations with him and, you know, other law enforcement professionals, who they don't seem to distinguish between prejudice and cognitive bias. And this is something that I've attempted to communicate to them, which is when I tell you that you have cognitive bias, that like just you had a gut instinct about what you know, you, my prosecutor, you walked up to the crime scene and you had a gut instinct that the break-in was not real. And
Right,
you can go into all of like, you can go down into your history and how you've like you know, interpreted facts in the past, but like this was your gut instinct and your gut instinct was wrong. But like
right,
try telling somebody who truly believes in their gut instinct that they are wrong. Like
right,
that's where it gets, and I try to tell them like that doesn't mean that you're a bad person, that you had a gut instinct and that it was wrong. It's not the same thing as saying like you're a racist, you're, you know, prejudiced against people. Like no, it just means that you're a human being and that you had a gut instinct, which we all have,
right,
and that gut instinct could be wrong.
right.
And I feel like sometimes, and I think this true of all people, that we get sort of stuck in our little echo chamber, we get stuck in our little worldview, and we come to believe things about ourselves. We have faith in ourselves to the extent that like even when evidence points to the contrary, it's not just a matter of questioning the theory. It requires us to question our very selves. And that's a tall order
Yeah.
for somebody who has really like solidly emphasized that their identity is wrapped up in their perception of themselves as a purveyor of justice.
And in
And
their ability to form these gut instincts. And that's why I was
right.
wondering if you got the sense that he felt his gut instincts were more accurate because they were guided by God. Like I didn't know if there was some of that because he spoke in one of the documentaries about, you know, being so religious, and I just got the sense that maybe there was some play with that, with his opinion of his own gut instinct, but maybe that's not something that you.
He wouldn't say that. No, I don't think he would interpret it that way. But when he speaks of himself as being a man of God, he's speaking as someone who is not corrupt. Like one of the worst things that he looks back on is when people accuse him of knowingly and willingly going after innocent people, and he
Yeah.
says, "No, that's not who I am. Like
Right.
I'm not a bad person." And that's what he's trying to say. Um, but you know, I think that a lot of the things that inform our gut decisions are unconscious, and he's not conscious of them, but also he cannot be convinced out of them because they are unconscious. And I think that's one of the dangers of, you know, and that's one of the responsibilities of of people who are in positions of power like that is they have to have some kind of humility to recognize that even if they feel something is a certain way, that doesn't mean that it necessarily is, and that you still need to follow the evidence like the rest of us.
So when you try to have these discussions with law enforcement or with your prosecutor about cognitive dissonance and, everything that you've just said, I'm assuming that it's like screaming into the void, because just with at least my interactions with police, like, you know, uh, I was going to tell a stupid story, but I won't. But is that it could feel like screaming into the void, like you can't really even get them to comprehend. Are you seeing that you're able to break through?
I mean, talking to a prosecutor or a law enforcement professional about their own cognitive bias is a little like trying to talk to your uncle about politics over Thanksgiving. Like, it's tough. That isn't to say that it's impossible. And I've certainly met, very thoughtful law enforcement professionals who acknowledge that wrongful convictions happen, and therefore they're deep, like, everyone cares about justice, right? What It depends on how they're trained and what they're meant to believe, though, right? And my prosecutor was trained a certain way, where he was trained to think that he could read behavioral cues and he could tell at first glance if somebody is lying to him or not. And we now know through, a ton of research that police officers are not especially good at telling if somebody is lying or not, but they are trained to believe that they are.
Right.
And so I think part of the problem is that we have both trained and incentivized law enforcement and prosecutors to believe that they are special, like, truth deciphering machines, when in fact they are not.
Right.
And so
They are not human lie detectors. That is for certain. And it's that thing where, I always call it tunnel vision, like where they kind of, just hone in to the exception of everybody else in the world, whoever they like is the guy. And I use the guy in a genderless way.
sure.
And it's, and it's scary. And it's one of those things, as defense attorneys, we saw it all the time. And, when it gets up from leaving law enforcement's hands into a prosecutor's hands here in the States, typically the prosecutor has adopted whatever concept or theory that the cops have developed in terms of, this is why we think it's the guy. Now the prosecutor may say, hey, all right, well, I need more. I need
And
you out
remember,
there."
in Italy, the prosecutor leads the criminal investigation,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that's
You know,
another quirk of the Italian system, is that the prosecutor is the leader of the investigation, and so there's no like checks and balance there.
yeah,
Um,
it's unbelievable. All right, so I want to pull up your I'm going to pull up your website real quick so that we can kind of go through it. Because it's
While you're
amazing.
doing that, Kranken says that her writing partner was in Budapest on set with you.
Hey, who was your writing partner?
We'll keep an
Anyway.
eye out. Mandy, if you see it in regular chat. Um, and then Mary asks, are you fighting a perjury case, Amanda? Or
So the criminal slander case, I'm still fighting that 18 years later. I'm still wrongly convicted of criminal slander in Italy, and I'm pursuing uh, pursuing the case once more in the European Court of Human Rights. So yes,
Oh,
I'm
good.
I'm waiting to hear back from them.
and a lot of
Good.
people are asking about Stillwater, which I'm not familiar with.
Oh, so Stillwater is a movie that came out a year or so ago that featured Matt Damon, and it was advertised as like the Amanda Knox story, but slightly different. And it so the American girl goes to France instead of Italy, and her roommate gets murdered, and there's actually a love lesbian angle, and so it's just like a scandalized version of the case that changed names but did not change the essence of the thing. And the ultimate sort of outcome is the Amanda Knox character is indirectly responsible for her roommate's murder. And so it was I felt it was a deeply unethical film
Well, that's what it
because
sounds like these people
it
are
didn't
saying
even
too.
attempt to like fictionalize, there are other things that people have done with. I don't think that people shouldn't be inspired by the case to like do their own creative work. But this didn't do its own creative work. It just capitalized off of the scandal of the story and attempted to tell a very humanizing story about what it must be like to be my dad, but certainly like implicated me in the crime. And I think that people who watch that, and the point that I wrote a essay about this of uh, talking about how when Hollywood capitalizes off of a true crime scandal, should they be considering the consequences that it has on real human beings' lives? Like if they're advertising this movie as the Amanda Knox story, but with a little spin, like people are going to watch it and then they're gonna draw conclusions about me based upon that. So
Right.
I invited the filmmakers to have a conversation with me about it because they famously were like, "Oh, we went down to Oklahoma and interviewed local Oklahoma people so we could really make their experience authentic." And I was like, "You know who you should have interviewed to make sure the experience was authentic? Was me." And I
Right.
was right here all along. I'm not hard to find.
Right.
I have a website which you have pulled
You
up on
you
the
do. And
screen.
I want to pop through it. So, and it's got everything. Like it's amandaknox.com. You can't get any easier than that. But it's got like every link that she has for everything. Her Hard Knocks podcast, which is amazing. If you guys haven't listened to it, you need to. It's really, really good. As a fellow podcaster, I really enjoy it. And I'm
Oh,
picky.
thanks.
I'm picky with it.
Thanks.
You've also got a Substack, which you do a lot of work on your Substack. And
I do a lot of writing somehow.
yeah, it's like I don't know how you find all the time. And then obviously, if you go through the site, this is the Hulu series that's out right now, and it's really, really well done. Like you
Yeah.
guys did
I'm
a
really proud of it.
yeah, like the cat, like we were talking about it because we watched. Unfortunately, it's still going. So because I was so excited, I'm like, I thought I waited enough to be able to binge it, and then I'm like, oh,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there are 3 more episodes, I
yeah,
believe. Yeah.
but it's like the casting is so on point though. Like for
Yeah.
like every character, the casting is like you guys just crush the casting. So
I
it's
know the
really well
actors are
done.
incredible.
They really are, and that's on Hulu, so y'all need to check that out. And then obviously we've got the books, and if you go to the website, you can order signed copies if you even want that, or you can just get the books. You've got free, which I cannot recommend enough. If you guys are at all interested in kind of the psychology of wrongful convictions and being exonerated and everything that comes along with that in a
Figuring your
way
life
that
out afterwards.
yeah, I mean, it's like it's such an amazing piece of writing. It really is.
And again, we really do suggest the audible version because like we
I
discussed at the
do.
top of this, Amanda is telling her own story and the emotion, the rawness. It
Yeah,
was
I don't know how that
so
interplays
compelling.
publisher wise, if like the book, like the people who print the books get upset, but like to me, being able to listen to you narrate it was like a whole nother level of awesome. So
Aw,
I
thanks.
recommend the audible version. The written version's obviously fabulous as well.
Well, you can buy the written version to just have on your shelf.
There you go.
It's problem solved. And you can get Waiting to Be Heard here as well. And then obviously other things that you've written in terms of articles. So I mean, you're out there in these streets getting stuff done. It shows your speaking engagements, and it also shows events that you have coming up as well. Because you are a very, very busy woman. You're out there. Doing the good work.
How
and
long have you been doing the podcast, Amanda?
Oh my goodness. Years now. I've been doing a podcast for years. I started out with The Truth About True Crime, where I was looking at other cases that were especially in media, and attempting to like untangle the truth from the media spin. And then I went on to work on a show called Labyrinths for many years with my husband. And now I have Hard Knocks, which is primarily me, although we do these extra Ask Amanda Anything episodes where my husband will like ask me questions that, listeners have written in. And we get to have a nice debate about that.
I love that. AAA.
AAA. Ah!
I love it. All right. We are so thankful for you to spend the time with us. It was like, I knew it would be amazing. You're an amazing person. Your perseverance, your strength, your courage, all the things that you've done in the most unthinkable of situations has been so awe-inspiring. So I'm really thankful that you spent the time to hang with us today to really kind of talk us through some of it. Is there anything else that I didn't promote that you'd like to get out there to the world?
No, thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. There's food for thought. And if anyone is interested in reaching out, there's a contact form on my website as well. So I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have.
Awesome. You are an amazing person. Thank you so much. Allie, you got any final words?
I do want to ask, and Polygraph raised it as well, but has your other roommates or Meredith's family, has anyone reached out and sort of acknowledged we were wrong or accepted your innocence?
No.
God. And what about your boss? Did you ever get a chance for him to understand that it wasn't like you just pointed the finger at him?
No.
Man.
Is this airing in Italy?
Sorry?
Is it available in Italy, the Hulu series?
Yeah, it's available in Italy. My books have not been published there, but they are available in English and I think German as well. So if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, no, I think that the narrative of Amanda Knox as a villain just really took hold so early on in the case, and
Right.
it
I
caused
know
so much
you kind of
damage.
recognized it in your book, but Bob and I are big supporters of people needing to understand when the people that you trust to investigate, when police, prosecutors, law enforcement are telling you this is the guy, like Bob said,
You got it right.
Kind of use that right. We got it right. We did the work. It's like a mental thing. They've come to terms with the fact that this is the person. And it's like it's very rare that you hear somebody, the victim or the victim's family, say, gosh, I really took a step back and I looked at it and now I understand that the police were wrong, but
Yeah.
it's
And Meredith's family has always said that they never wanted the wrong people to go to prison for this horrible crime that happened against Meredith. And one of their biggest complaints, which I agree with, is that the scandal about whether or not I was involved in this crime took over the case, and it became less about
Meredith.
what happened to Meredith and more about, is she or isn't she guilty? And that is an injustice. Like, if this
more
case
than that,
had
your sexuality.
right. So if this case had been managed correctly, I never would have been accused, and the truth about what happened to Meredith never would have gotten lost. And that is something that we agree on, even if we're not on the same page about, me and my place and everything.
Are you and Raffaele
frustrating,
still
though.
friends? Do you
Oh,
I know
yeah.
you're married and you have your own life, but
Yeah,
okay.
Raphael and I are still friends. He actually came to New York for the premiere of the Hulu series.
Nice.
So that was a lot of fun to see him in that space. And yeah, we're still
Is he
friends.
still in Italy?
Yep, he's still in Italy. He's a computer engineering professional. He has his own company. He's trucking along despite the stigma that he carries with him to this day. So
Right.
he's doing great.
Well, consider us huge supporters, and I am a huge fan of the work that you're doing, and keep fighting the good fight. And just know, over here on our little channel, you've always got a platform, and we always have your back, because I think you're not only an amazing person, but I think you're a badass on top of it.
Thanks.
There's that. So Amanda Knox, you're amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. And
you guys look at her website, buy a book,
all of it, do all of it.
Do some
Thanks.
podcast listening.
Thanks
again,
so much.
Amanda.
Thanks,
Take care.
Amanda. All right, bye.
Wow.
All right. So she was amazing. That was great.
Way more grace than I think I could ever.
I mean, she's like,
have
her ability to be able to really, you know, kind of compartmentalize
Right.
things in order to kind of move forward in different ways is amazing. Cause it's like, it's that thing that we're always talking about. I don't know how I would react if that was my life, my reality. You know, it's like I'm always saying, when I have people on that are wrongfully convicted, like my mindset is like, I'd be bitter as hell. Like
Right.
I'd be angry as hell. I'm like, you stole 25 years of my life. I'd be furious, I think. But
Right.
maybe you come out the other side and you're not. I don't know. All right. We can't hang too much. Did you get up all the
Yeah,
the
I did. I put them all up.
you
We've
get
got a new
Tracy?
member here. Yes, I had put it up and I saw that um that Amanda said she was reading them, so I saw, you know, her take note.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. You guys, thank you so much for hanging with us. Allie and I, of course, have to run to a sporting event per usual. We're really excited about this live. Please help us. If you like the show, make sure you subscribe. If you don't, well, maybe still shrink it down and give us the like. Give us the
Yeah,
thumbs up. Help
it's
get it out there.
help get Amanda's story out there, you know, get the
Yeah.
website out there. We've been putting it in the chat.
It's all the YouTube things. Just like, share, subscribe. If you're on Replay Crew, please leave some messages in there. Start the chat up. That again helps it get in the algo. To our mods, we love you. To Tracy and Mandy, happy day before your birthday day,
Happy
Mandy.
day before your birthday day.
Big singing event for Mandy's birthday tomorrow. We adore you guys, and thank you guys for always hanging with us. We adore you, because without you, I'm just an old man.
Sitting around talking to his wife.
And Amanda Knox. Bye.
Hudson.